So today's lesson is over parallel and perpendicular lines. Now most people remember that parallel lines are lines that do not intersect. They have no points in common. So I've got these two lines that are never going to cross each other. Now what you need to remember is that parallel lines, you can actually tell if two lines are parallel to each other if you look at their slopes. They have the same slope, so in this case both of my lines had the slope of 2, so those two lines are parallel. The reason that happens, if they each have a slope of 2, they may be starting at different points, but if they're both going up 2 and over 1, up 2 and over 1, they're never going to cross each other. The other type of lines that we're going to be dealing with are perpendicular lines. Now these are lines that are going to cross each other, but they don't just cross each other, they cross each other in order to find or form right angles. Now a right angle is 90 degrees, so it's kind of like a corner piece. Now just to make things clear, this would be an example of perpendicular because my two lines are crossing each other and forming a 90-degree angle. If I have two lines like this, they are crossing each other, but they're not forming 90-degree angles, so they are not considered perpendicular. So you can also tell if lines are perpendicular by looking at their equations. If you look at my examples, 2/3 for the slope and -3/2 for the slope, those are considered opposite reciprocals. So let's break that down and find out what it really means. To be an opposite, that changes your sign. So like if you have a +5, the opposite of that is a -5. Or if you have a -4, the opposite of that is a +4. Now the reciprocal part flips the top and the bottom of a fraction. So for example, if I have 3/7, the reciprocal is 7/3. And I like to think of that as a re-flip-rical. Reciprocal or reciprocal, that means you flip the fraction. So if you go back up to our example right here, the slope was 2/3 and -3/2. So to do a perpendicular slope, they took that fraction, 2/3, flipped it around, and instead of having a positive number, now they made it negative. So that is the opposite reciprocal. Okay. Something else I want to make clear, when you're dealing with the slope, it is just the number that's attached to your letter x. It's not actually including the letter x. Let's look down at example 1. Find the opposite reciprocal of the following numbers. So if I have a fraction like 1/2, I'm going to start by flipping it around, 2/1, and then I'm going to deal with the opposite part. This one was a +1/2, so I'm going to make this negative. Now if I have a -2 divided by 1, -2 divided by 1, that simplifies to give me -2. So I'm going to leave it as -2 in its most simplified form. If you look at example number 2, that one is already a fraction, so I'm going to flip the 3 and the 4. This one was a negative number, so its opposite reciprocal has to be positive. If you look down at example number 3, this problem, or this number, 5, is not a fraction. Well, in order to turn something into a fraction, we're going to use that same trick that we did with slope and just put it over 1. Because if I have 5 divided by 1, that's still 5. I have not changed that number. But now I have a fraction so that when I do the reciprocal part, I have to flip them around. I know what number goes on the top. This was a positive number, so the opposite needs to make it negative. And one more like that, example number 4. If I do not have a fraction already, I'm going to put it over 1. So -8 divided by 1 is still -8. But now when I do the reciprocal part, I'm going to flip them around. This was a negative number, so my opposite reciprocal has to be positive. Okay, so let's look at some of the examples on the back. Now, given y is equal to -3/8x plus 2, what would be a parallel slope and perpendicular? So I'm just looking at this number that's attached to my x. Remember that if it's a parallel line, that one has the same slope. So I'm going to put same slope next to it. I'm not going to change anything from there to there. But perpendicular is the one where you have to flip the fraction. So if it's 3/8, now it's 8/3. This was a negative number, so my opposite reciprocal has to be positive. So this is the opposite reciprocal. Looking down at number 6, same kind of question. We want to know what a parallel slope would be to 10. Well, parallel is the exact same thing, so I would rewrite it as 10. If I'm doing perpendicular, though, 10 is the same thing as 10 divided by 1. So when I do the reciprocal part, I'm going to flip it around so that it's 1 over 10. And this is a positive number, so now this one needs to be negative. One more problem like that, example number 7. Parallel slope would be the exact same thing. My slope is 1/2, so parallel is also 1/2. But when I do the perpendicular, I'm going to do a little scratch work down here on the bottom. If I flip 2 and 1, so the 1/2 becomes 2 over 1, and I make this a negative number, I still need to simplify it to make it -2. So now here's the way that you would probably see these questions done on the STAR test. For the following problems, you can use whichever method you prefer, but we're going to be writing the equation of a line like we've done on our project, like we've done on our tests. We've been doing this a lot lately. You have a choice between doing slope-intercept or point-slope, whichever one you like more. But I've seen more people using slope-intercept, so I'm going to be doing the examples with slope-intercept. Number 8 asks us to write an equation for the line that passes through the point 4, 10, and is parallel to y is equal to 3x plus 8. So in order to write the equation of a line, we need two things, a slope and a point. They gave me the point. They want it to pass through 4, 10, and that is my x and my y value. Now find the slope. Look, they said parallel. So if I look at the slope on this line, it was 3. Parallel to that would be the exact same thing. I don't care about the plus 8. That's just extra information. I just needed to use the slope to find a parallel line. So I'm going to use slope-intercept, which is y is equal to mx plus b, and I'm going to plug in all the information that they gave me. So y is 10, my slope was 3, my x value is 4, and I'm going to put the plus b. After that, you need to multiply the m and the x together, so that gives me 10 is equal to 12 plus b. And then for my final step, I need to finish getting b by itself. Now the 12 is on the same side of the equal sign as b, so that's why it's the one that actually needs to move. So that means that b is equal to a -2. So for the very last step, I'm going back to y is equal to mx plus b. We know our slope was 3, so I'm going to start with y is equal to 3x. And we solved for our b variable. That one's going to be -2. So y is equal to 3x minus 2. The next question is very similar. They said to write an equation for the line that passes through 2, -1 and is perpendicular to y is equal to 2x minus 5. So I know I need a slope and I need a point. They gave me the point, so that's the easy part. This time they said perpendicular, so you're not using the same slope. You've got to do the opposite reciprocal. Now I know 2 is the same thing as 2 over 1, so if I flip that around, it's going to be 1/2. And I also need the opposite sign, so now it's going to be negative. And I'm going to use that same method, y is equal to mx plus b, to write my equation. So plug in your information. Y is -1, your m is -1/2, and your x value is 2. I still have the plus b. Once you've plugged it in, you need to multiply m and x. So that's going to give me -1 is equal to -1 plus b. Then from there, I need to finish getting b by itself, so I've got to get rid of this -1 that's on the same side. I add 1 to each side, which means it does cancel out on the right, and it cancels out on the left. That's when you need to put a 0. So going back to my last step, I've got to look at y is equal to mx plus b. I know my slope is -1/2, so -1/2 x, and since my b is 0, I'm not going to bother putting plus 0. This would just be my answer.